All right, we just finished recording our mailbag episode, our first ever mailbag episode. A lot of good questions. I think this is our longest episode to date. I'll have some fun editing this. We talked about a lot of different topics from our personal relationships with F1. I blacked out for like 15 minutes talking about NASCAR. But a lot of good stuff here. We cover the silly season driver carousel going on right now. Follow us at Break Check F1 on all socials. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening. Enjoy the episode.
All right, welcome back to Break Check. This is episode 24. We are recording our first episode during the summer break. We'll do 2 others during the break before we get back into racing. I think we all need a little bit of a break, although I don't think it really feels like a break given all of the crazy news that has come out during the last couple of days.
Yeah, where do we start? So we talked about, did we talk on camera about Sebastian Vettel retiring?
Yes, I was very sad I wore my Vettel shirt.
That's right. That's right. So that's where this all starts. Sebastian Vettel retires, leaves an opening at Aston Martin. A lot of rumors, like Megan talked about, with that seat with the team. Like I talked about, we thought maybe Mick Schumacher. We didn't know. Mm-hmm. Out of nowhere, Fernando Alonso takes the seat on a multi-year deal, which is its own can of worms. I don't know how that driver is going to work with that team. So then that leaves an opening at Alpine, which there was a natural replacement for that did not seem to materialize. Megan, do you want to tell us about Oscar Piastri?
I would love to talk about Oscar Piastri. We have said pretty much all season how much we were waiting and hoping and wanting Oscar Piastri to be this next new driver in Formula One, because he won Formula 2 at a young age. He's very talented. It's very obvious, especially during his free practice 2, his testing, that he deserves the seat in F1. So it was just kind of a waiting game of like, okay, whenever someone's gone, it's him now. So everyone was kind of speculating he would go to Williams, but now with this Alpine seat open, it seemed like a no-brainer because he's already the reserve driver for Alpine. He's been with them for years, so it kind of made sense. So during Australia's middle of the night, the Alpine team announced that Oscar would be driving for Alpine, and everyone uproared and cheers and excitement and thrills, and we were all feeling good. It was great news for the start of the break, but we weren't hearing anything from Oscar. Kind of weird. Normally the driver announces with the team that they will be racing. Maybe 2 hours later, it's our afternoon, Oscar puts out a post. He said that I've been notified that Alpine has announced that I will be racing for them. This is not true. I will not be racing with Alpine in 2023. Went back to bed. So I don't know. There's just that in general.
Yes. So there's a lot going on here. Oscar's tweet, last I looked, has like 300,000 likes on it.
It's unreal.
It might be the most liked F1 tweet I've ever seen. Oscar has been an Alpine junior driver for years now. So it, like you said, seems like a natural progression for him to just get the spot. They were going to loan him to Williams because Alonso was still performing well. So he was going to get a 1-year extension. Alonso wanted the multi-year deal, led him to Aston Martin. All right, just put in Oscar. The brutal thing about Oscar's statement is not only that he say, hey, we are still in negotiations, nothing is official. He said, I am not driving for Alpine.
Like, that's a bold statement for like a 21-year-old to make on social media against the team that has backed him for like years.
By going out and so outwardly saying, I am not driving for this team, it would look so bad if he somehow did not end up in an F1 seat the next year, which kind of looked like it could be a possibility until McLaren decided to kind of go behind everyone's backs and apparently signed him for 2023 and beyond. No official statement yet, as they seem to be waiting to get a contract lined up at another team for odd man out Daniel Ricciardo. There's already been a lot of backlash Megan, I know you have some thoughts.
I have so many. Yeah, before we keep getting into the McLaren thing, going back to Alpine,
Sorry.
I think that the way that this has all been handled, it's very much obviously backfired on them because Alonso very much wants to be in the sport for years. So for Alpine to give him a 1-year contract and just that and not give him a multi-year, it seemed kind of obvious that he wasn't going to be happy with that. So now looking back, it's like, okay, now I get why Alonso wanted to homie hop into another team, his 5th or 6th team for, however long he's been racing. But because of they made that decision, it also shouldn't be a surprise to them that Oscar was in negotiations with other teams. They were obviously okay with considering lending him to Williams. So it made sense that other teams would also be possibly interested in Oscar, knowing his talent and knowing that he was technically still available for the 2023 season because Alpine was continuing to hold him off. So the way this whole thing played out, while very unfortunate for Alpine, they kind of did it to themselves because they're the ones who wanted to continue to prioritize for another year a driver in his 40s when they had a driver in his early 20s that they could have for 5 to 10 years. But because they wanted to keep holding him off, I mean, honestly, I think it's a smart move for Oscar and his team. But now going into the McLaren thing, it is pretty unfortunate because they did publicly say like a week or two ago that Daniel's contract is valid. He's here until end of 2023, end of discussion. Like there should be no question about it. Even Daniel went out and said, I'm committed until the end of 2023. No question about it. This is it. And there's now rumors that, at the end of Sunday's race, they told Daniel that they plan to replace him with Oscar. So to know that these conversations were happening probably the past few weeks between Oscar and McLaren, yet they were putting out to the public and putting to Daniel that they were planning to keep him, even though they were planning to not, I think it's just kind of a shitty move on their part.
I think the really shitty thing is they put so much public pressure on Daniel to be the one who decided what his McLaren F1 future was this year and next year and beyond. And after putting all that pressure, and Daniel came out and said, no, I'm here. I will fulfill my contract. I want to be here and I want to do well. Like a couple weeks later, they just completely go back on everything and they decided for him.
I want to give props to Daniel, though, because I can't imagine the mental toll that this is probably taking on him. So I'm glad, they have the summer break and, hopefully he can just make the most of this season. I know there's a couple rumors of some teams we can talk about that he might go to. Most notably, Alpine is obviously in conversation with him. There's rumors of that. So that's kind of my hope for him. I think it would be great for him to end with the Alpine team that he was with before McLaren, because he did really enjoy that team and get along with them. I know there's one other rumor for the Alpine seat, but I can talk about that after. I'm not sure if you have thoughts on some of the other teams that he's rumored for.
I don't know that there's much credibility to any of these rumors, but the Haas team may have an open seat because the Mick Schumacher future is kind of up in the air right now. That one's going to be kind of weird to see play out just because Haas kind of has the upper hand here and they can take their time. I wouldn't mind seeing Daniel in the Haas seat. Just it would be another chance with a team with kind of sound leadership. I think Gunther does a good job over there. And then there's the Williams team. I think I'd rather see Daniel pursue other ventures than go to Williams. Yeah.
Really? Same. The only other rumor I saw was because there is a clause in Pierre's contract where he could switch teams if the team that reaches out to him is doing better than AlphaTauri. Essentially,
which is most teams,
which is a lot. Yeah. So he kind of looked out for this year. But so there is rumors that Alpine may be going for Pierre. And if that happens, AlphaTauri could then come in and take Daniel, because he was a part of the Red Bull Academy, driver academy for years. He started AlphaTauri, Red Bull, and then, after a couple of years moved to Renault. So I could also see that playing out as well. I think I would not prefer, I wouldn't say prefer it, but I would be happy with either scenario, whether it's Daniel or Pierre at Alpine and then Daniel goes to AlphaTauri, just because I want to see them both in Formula One still. I don't think
Mhm.
either of them are out of it. But also I want Pierre to have the opportunity because he's still in his prime to
Yes.
race for a better team. And the longer he waits it out and plays it out and doesn't get that chance, I don't think he'll ever will. And I don't want to see him kind of, you know, get to a better team and then kind of have a situation with Daniel where people thought he was going to do incredible at McLaren because he's been an incredible driver for years. And then he gets in there and he's not performing like you expected him to. And I don't want to see that happen with Pierre. So I could see either happening. I'd be happy with either, but I know that was one of the other conversations that was happening.
Yeah, I'd be happy to see. We both like Pierre. I think we'd both be very happy to see him leave AlphaTauri. I do think if Pierre goes to Alpine and leave that seat open, I'd think Mick Schumacher will head on over there. So
Which honestly, I would be kind of surprised because I mean, I guess it's just because his dad was, always either Ferrari or like the Mercedes group. It was kind of like one of
yeah,
those two.
yeah,
So I would suspect that if he was to go to with anything, it would be like Williams or something because they're at least
yeah.
part of Mercedes. But so it would be really interesting to see him with Red Bull. I wonder how that would play out. But
It would be interesting to see him with Red Bull, but you got to remember it would be a few years, and then it would be Red Bull Audi, or sorry, Red Bull Porsche.
Red Bull Porsche, that is true. That is a
So
good point.
a lot of and I think kind of we talk about that 2026 entry point for the German teams is kind of
Mhm.
weird timing wise, but I think Mick
Yeah.
at AlphaTauri for a couple years while Porsche makes their way over could line up.
Ooh, that is a pull.
The Vettel retirement set it off. The Alonso signing to Aston Martin, kind of the first domino. I think Daniel will be the next. I'm sure we'll know where he's at in the next week or so. All right, after covering all the nonsense that silly season brings, we're going to slow down a little bit here and we want to do our first mailbag episode. We took questions that our friends, families, listeners all wanted answered. We organized them into a Google document and we're gonna go through and let it rip. I'm actually very excited to do this.
Yeah, I love these episodes, so I can't wait
Yes.
to do it.
So our first question is about qualifying. How does it work? Are all teams on the track at the same time? And why is there 2 days? Qualifying is actually mostly on one day. There are some cases where the qualifying process takes 2 days, and I'll get into those. So mostly the a race weekend will be Friday practice, Saturday qualifying, Sunday race. The qualifying on Saturday works in a knockout system. It's got 3 rounds: Q1, Q2, Q3, standing for qualifying 1, 2, and 3. Q1 is 18 minutes long, and it's the 5 slowest are out. Then the next 15 go on to Q2, 15 minutes long, 5 slowest out. And then Q3 is the final round. It's 12 minutes long. You try and set the fastest time gets the pole position for the race. And that the positioning from Q3 sets the starting positions for the race on the grid. All the teams are on the track at the same time for qualifying. It can cause some traffic, it can cause some heated moments, and it can cause some crashes. A good example recently was this year at Monaco. Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez crashed a bit during Q3 at the very end. So it just ended before Max Verstappen could get his fastest lap time down. Sergio Perez ended up winning the Monaco Grand Prix. I know Jos Verstappen, father of Max, was not happy about the whole weekend, so it can cause some problems. Um, there are 3 races this year, and this is something that F1 has been incorporating a little bit and seem to be popular. I don't think that they'll ever fully commit to this, but I do think they'll sprinkle them in here and there, and those are sprint races. So what this is instead of the Friday practice, Saturday qualifying, Sunday race, they will have a practice session on Friday, but then qualifying will then follow after. Qualifying, it's done in the same way And then it will set the order for this sprint race on Saturday, which is a shorter race, usually like 20-ish laps, something like that.
Yeah.
And the results from the sprint race will determine the starting position for the race on Sunday. Megan, did I miss anything?
Nope, you covered it.
It's a lot less complicated now than it was. There was a lot of rules with like tire usage before that Megan went over at the beginning of the year. There were some rule changes. That's not really a factor anymore, which I think has simplified it a little bit. And I think it helps out the midfield teams quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do enjoy some of the sprint races too, just because it switches it up. It gives people an opportunity, because obviously some of the lower teams, like even like Haas, sometimes they may not always do great during the traditional qualifying set, but they are really good, like especially Magnussen, when it comes to sprint races and being able to overtake. So it really gives some of those drivers an opportunity to start a grid higher than they normally would.
And a lot of times I feel like top teams like Red Bull or Mercedes or even Ferrari will take their grid penalties on sprint weekends because their drivers can just zip through the entire midfield during the race and just start in like third instead of 20th.
Like most iconically, if anyone watched I'm sure many of you watched the Brazil Grand Prix last year, Lewis Hamilton, look it up if you haven't seen it. He started from the back of the grid, made it to like 5th or 10th or something like that. And then he had another penalty, so he started at 10th and then ended up finishing first in the race, which was incredible. So watch it if you haven't seen it, but great example of some of those top tier teams starting from the back and popping up.
Megan, do you want to take us to the next question?
Yes, of course. Also, if anyone's watching, I apologize for looking like Charles Leclerc on that boat the other day. I'm very red on the camera because it is very dark. So the little red light from my camera right now is creating this fun burnt effect. We're also matching unintentionally in this episode, but that's also, to be fair, that's his outfit 9 times out of 10. So
absolutely. I would be curious to go back and see how many episodes I'm just wearing a black t-shirt in.
I would say at least half at minimum. All right. So my first question was, what is S1 through 3 and what is P1 through 3? So S1 through 3 stands for sector. So that is sector 1 through sector 3. And then P1 through 3 is position 1 through 3, which are the podium positions. For the sector times, the 3 sector times, they are set throughout a driver's lap. And they're guidelines essentially that help teams, drivers, and viewers understand how a car is performing on the track. So a great example is the last race, Latifi, when he was doing one of his lap times during qualifying, he was purple in the first sector, which means fastest on the grid. Green is usually, their time is faster than whoever they're comparing against, or just, the average lap time during that second sector on the grid. And then yellow, which is what his third sector was, means that they are going slower than expected or slower than whoever driver they're comparing to. So that's kind of a great way to see, if the car is going fast, if they're comparing, you say like Charles and Carlos, and they're looking at the 2 times, the colors, that purple, green, yellow, will help you be able to tell if they're going faster or slower than their teammate that they're comparing to. And then P1 through 3 is just an easier and quicker way to say position 1. So, when we're having conversations, when they're reporting during the race, it's much quicker to say P1, P3 than saying they're in position 1, they're in position 3. So it's just a quick way to acknowledge where they're standing, both in the grid and then during the race. And position 1 also means it's pole position. So when you're qualifying, if you're in P1 at the end of Q3 during qualifying, you start at the front of the grid. And you also get just a little tire thing for winning pole position, which is exciting for the drivers, I guess. But
one more phrase you just reminded me I wanted to add in that you might hear during qualifying, but some people might not know, is provisional pole. Yes. Provisional pole means you put down the fastest lap time, but there is still more time in Q3 for others to pass that. So that was something that confused me when I first started watching F1, but I learned The P1 through P3 kind of abbreviations. It took some time for me to get out of saying first, second, and third, or fourth, fifth, sixth, whatever. But now I'm fully, I I went go-karting, and like my family asked me, "Oh, how'd you do it?" I go, "Oh, P1," and my mom looked at me, what's that?
Oh, one more thing, just thinking of the other ones too. There's FP 1 through 3, and that's free practice 1, free practice 2, free practice 3. So before qualifying, like Juan was walking through, there's 3 practice rounds. They're all 3 an hour long. And so there was 2 on Friday, 1 on Saturday. So if you hear FP, that's free practice. If you hear P, that's position.
Next question is for both of us. Who was your first favorite driver and why? Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think I mentioned this earlier in our podcast when we first started, that mine was Daniel Ricciardo, both a little bit Lewis Hamilton. Those were the 2 drivers I was first known about, like made aware of, because they were a friend of mine's. They were their favorites. They were the ones that I just started following because they're the only names I recognized. But then watching Drive to Survive, Daniel Ricciardo is one of the first drivers you start to follow. So I think Daniel Ricciardo just inherently became my first favorite because he was the one I knew the most about. If anyone does want to, learn more about these drivers, they do a lot of interviews with different podcasts too. One of my favorites, The Armchair Expert, they've done 2 interviews now with Daniel Ricciardo. So also when I started watching the sport, I was also watching this podcast, saw that he was on it and started listening to it. It's a great episode. Highly recommend it.
So my favorite driver, I think, is well documented, is Lewis Hamilton. Like, bar none, he is my favorite. Sergio Perez, second favorite, just the Mexican lineage. I gotta keep supporting. So if I take those 2 out, my first favorite driver was Daniel Ricciardo, because my introduction into F1 was Drive to Survive. He is like the main character of those first couple seasons. He is charismatic. He's very good. Don't ever let anyone forget, Daniel Ricciardo is a very talented driver. And he is a self-proclaimed, basically American. So I think his personality resonated with me a lot. He seems like a great guy. And like we have said, we want to see nothing but the best for him in the future. But yeah, Daniel Ricciardo, besides for my 2 just kind of like adopted favorite drivers, Daniel Ricciardo was my first favorite. So this next question, what is a driver's workout routine? A lot of people don't realize these drivers are world-class athletes and they are in crazy good shape. So they face anywhere between 2 and 6 Gs throughout the race. After letting off the throttle on a straightaway, they have to apply about 350 pounds of force to the brake pedals to slow the car down. And they have to be very strong without being bulky or heavy, because the heavier they are, the more they weigh the car down. This is another reason why you rarely see very tall F1 drivers, because tall people are inherently heavier. And even George Russell, who I believe is the tallest by a good amount, is skinny. He is a skinny guy. Yeah, and he's muscular and he's strong, but he's skinny. So this at times led to issues with drivers leading unhealthy lifestyles to be lighter. Back in 2019, a seat plus driver weight minimum of 176 pounds was introduced. So if you plus your seat weigh less than that, you have to add weights to the car to get to that weight minimum. So that has promoted more of a healthy lifestyle among these drivers. So they do a lot of workouts that promote functional strength in their necks, legs, arms, and most importantly, their core. Almost all exercises they do will promote just kind of core strength, cardiovascular strength, and many will incorporate things like boxing. I know Carlos Sainz, Daniel Ricciardo both notably use boxing in their training regimen. And that will train their cardiovascular strength along with hand-eye coordination. And then their actual routine kind of depends on the time of the year as well. So the beginning of the year is going to focus on maintaining muscle, not building any, because drivers are going to come in, dedicated and good drivers will come into the season at their ideal race weight because they've had the off season to get there. But throughout the season, they will lose a ton of weight just from, and it's a workout to be in these cars. Like they lose a ton of weight throughout the season. So in the summer break, like we are right now, they might focus on building that back up, as well as adding more cardio to kind of get them through the rest of the season. Recovery is crucial for them. They have constant jet lag, like just all the time, because they're jet setting across the world. Essentially, they're a traveling circus. Many will work with specialists on the best way to offset this. The driver trainer relationship is very, very important. You see Daniel's trainer a lot. It seems like his best friend on Drive to Survive. And most notably, Lewis Hamilton and his trainer, Angela Cullen, are practically inseparable. So there is a lot of training that goes into Formula One driving. I would say the best comparison is sports like track and field or gymnastics or boxing, where they are working out heavily with a specific purpose, rather than a lot of times in the team sports like football, basketball, soccer, even volleyball, you see people just kind of work out to be bigger, more muscular, stronger. I don't really think that is the case in F1. They work out very hard for like a very specific purpose and muscle group.
Yeah. Just to add to the recovery thing too, I know Lewis Hamilton will regularly talk about like acupuncture and things like that he'll do for recovery. And then in Drive to Survive, you see Bottas and like the sauna and then doing the ice water. So just like little things like that, they do regularly or whenever they can when they're not, at a race weekend. But they're always finding like weird different ways to try and recover just throughout the week and then during their off weeks, because it's so crucial so that they don't injure themselves before the race or during the race.
I can't imagine how hard it is on their bodies. I go-karted 3 races. There were like 10 to 15 minutes each, and I lost 3 pounds.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, I lost 3 pounds in just water.
All right, so kind of tying into that, I had the question, how long are drivers training for in F1? So in terms of daily training, it can range anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. In 2017, Bottas had said in an interview that during the winter season, before the new season starts, he would be training anywhere from 6 days a week, focusing largely on your neck and core. So again, kind of what Juan was saying too, it's very important they need that thick, tight neck, just because when they're turning, the amount of force here, you obviously don't want it to like snap or have pain. So Kevin Magnussen actually earlier in the season talked about his struggles with neck pain and having to do loads of recovery after the races, because he hadn't been driving in an F1 car for a year, and his neck was, and because of the last minute call in to, fill in that seat, his neck wasn't nearly as trained or thick as some of the other drivers had, because they had all winter to prepare for that. But then because the season is so expansive, it's over the majority of the year, starting anywhere, technically first races in maybe March or April, but they're starting practice in February, and then it goes through November. They are training really throughout the year. Drivers don't get extensive breaks to relax. So things like the summer break, they'll obviously have days and times like that to indulge more and maybe go out, drink, party, etc. They'll obviously get a party occasionally after races, especially if they have a week off in between races. But otherwise, the winter break, early in the winter break, around the Christmas time, holiday, stuff like that, is when they also get to indulge. But otherwise, they're really training throughout the year, which to me sounds exhausting. But, you can see, when you see the clips of them partying and stuff, it's like there's really only a few times of the year that they actually get to indulge and do stuff like that. But so the next question is for both of us, and it's, what would your dream team be? I don't know if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, I would love to. So I don't know how specific we're supposed to get with this question and if they are talking about driver pairing, but my dream team, we don't have an American team. We do have an American team in F1. Haas is an American team, but like hardly.
They're based in England. It's not, they have no American drivers.
Up until last year, they had Russian backing financially. They don't have American drivers. It's hardly an American team, but, and obviously Andretti might be coming in. My dream team is Ford Motor Company's performance kind of division, Ford Performance. They have a couple racing teams throughout motorsport right now. They previously were involved in F1, I believe, as an engine supplier, pairing with BMW at a point or another, I believe. My dream team is Ford Performance F1 team. I think I would like one American young prospect F1 driver, and then maybe one veteran kind of guy, sort of kind of how Alfa Romeo has their setup. I know Joe is not like a prodigy or anything like that, but I think one young driver, one older driver, maybe some financial backing, some executive management from notable honorary Americans, Lewis Hamilton, Daniel Ricciardo. I don't know. But I think my dream F1 team is definitely Ford.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great answer. I was looking at, so I said in my response that I typed out so I didn't forget. If I was to pick like a team right now that's like my dream or favorite team, it's Ferrari's people. So like Charles and Carlos, I think they're probably my favorite pairing on the grid. I think they work really well together. They're incredibly talented. They have the most probable chance of winning a championship in a great car, in my opinion, other than maybe, I mean, it's debatable, but I do think they would have a great chance because they're
You
both
can say it. Who's the other team?
well, it's honestly not Red Bull, it's Mercedes, but okay.
There it is.
I mean, you've got Mr. Consistent and then you have Lewis Hamilton. They're incredible, but
yeah.
So they're also equally a dream team, to be honest. But I was thinking, if I could pick a dream team, it would be either Porsche and Audi, one of them. I don't care. Whoever wants their own team, have it. But Mick and Seb, that is like my hope for the future, that actually becomes a reality, because obviously that they have an incredible relationship. They're a great pair, friendship, etc. I think Seb is one of the most talented drivers that have come through Formula One. And to have him alongside Mick, I think they would just really do nothing but support each other and push each other on the track and off the track. So I think that would be my dream pair.
I can really get behind that. I think I've mentioned to you a couple times, I really, 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 really like Porsche, like just as a company. Yeah. And I really wanted to see them enter F1 as kind of as their own entity. But yeah, that would be great. Actually, this kind of that takes us a little bit into my next question. So the question was, why has NASCAR not caught on popularity wise like F1 has? And that is a tough question to answer. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So the first thing I want to talk about is in America, because F1 has been like the thing, like the pinnacle of motorsport around the world forever. And it is just recently that it's kind of taking America by storm. And America has, and Americans have, a habit of doing this where kind of our own things like the NFL, NBA, MLB, we consider them to be just kind of like the pinnacle of sports. Yeah, it's our pinnacle of sports. And for the most part, the NBA, MLB, and NFL are the top leagues in their respective sports in the whole world. We do not have that in motorsport. And I think another good example is soccer or football. Football is not as popular here because we don't have the top league in the world. So there is progress and effort being made to increasing the international reach that NASCAR has. And I think that is great. And I give them a lot of props for trying to do so. There's a new Michael Jordan led team called 2311 Racing. There's the Trackhouse Project 91, and that's an initiative to expand NASCAR's international reach by having international drivers participate in select NASCAR races. Kimi Räikkönen will be making his NASCAR debut later this year. Daniil Kivat is actually focusing on just being a full-time NASCAR driver moving forward, and he will be racing the remaining 3 road courses this season.
Just real quick, for anyone who doesn't know who those 2 people that Juan just highlighted, it's okay. Kimi Räikkönen, he retired from F1 last year. He's a world time champion. He was in the sport again, similar to Alonso, for like almost 20 years or around 20 years. Really great guy, very fascinating. His interviews are great, very short and brutal, honest responses. And then Daniel Kivat, he used to race he was in the Red Bull Racing Group for a very long time. He raced with Daniel Ricciardo at one point, I think on Renault for 1 year, and then it was Ocon. But anywho, yeah, so they're both former F1 drivers that anyone who's been watching the sport would definitely recognize. But if you're just getting into it, neither of them are in it anymore. So
motorsport has potential in America. I think for a long time, people kind of had this false misconception that just motorsport could not be popular. And I think F1 is showing that that's just not the case. You just have to tailor more to what people want to see rather than just your dedicated audience. And we even see F1 doing this to try and get into the American market. I know some Europeans are not a fan of the Americanization of F1, but America's a huge market that F1 has been trying to and successfully tapping into. And I think NASCAR would like to start doing the same with the rest of the world. And I think there's a lot of potential moving forward on maybe F1 drivers making their way to NASCAR moving forward, whether through that Trackhouse 90 Project 91 or other avenues. I think one of the more notable possibilities is Daniel Ricciardo. If Daniel Ricciardo came to the United States to be a NASCAR driver, he would be a superstar. And Daniel is bringing a dedicated fan base, like a dedicated fan base that is going to watch him race week in, week out. And I think could start a trend of having household name NASCAR drivers like from the times of Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt Jr., who was the Budweiser driver for like 20 years. My dad worked for Budweiser growing up, so he was a big household name for us. And really, I like all this is to say, I think the main issue in NASCAR's popularity compared to F1's is F1 is international and NASCAR just is not right now.
Right.
That's not to say that it won't be. That's not to say that they're not trying. But until NASCAR kind of plants its roots outside of the United States, I think that they will just kind of stagnate a little in the American market.
Yeah. Two quick things. One, the Formula One has always been, yes, an international sport, but it's also largely almost majorly based in Europe. It's always been, all the races were usually in Europe. It's where it started. Obviously, there's just so many countries congregated in Europe that you can travel to, unlike America, where you have 50 states and they can take, 12, 20 hours to get to.
Yes.
So it's just a very different layout. But Formula One, it's not even just America. They have, they're trying to get South Africa, have one African race, next year, starting to branch out. They obviously have Australia, Japan, Singapore. So they are starting to reach out into more countries and really embrace them being an international sport. And NASCAR, like you said, has always been American. So I think that they can take some of what F1's doing and learn. Other drivers I think would do great in NASCAR, even if it was just like one race, would be George Russell and Alex Albon, because both have done cars, just like those full body kind of cars before, and they were incredible. So I think those two drivers would do really well in NASCAR race.
I don't know how much you follow the NASCAR rumor mill. There is a lot of hope that they're going to be able to get Sebastian Vettel into some NASCAR races next year.
I would love to see if Vettel came. I would be going to I would fly back from London to see Vettel race on a NASCAR race. I don't care. It could be in Timbuktu. I will go.
I know some people do not like to attribute F1's popularity solely to this, but Formula One has a very high level produced reality TV series attached to it, and NASCAR does not. Drive to Survive, with all its faults and flaws, is a very well-made show on a very popular streaming service that does not seem to be going away anytime soon. And I think the longer that show is out, the more F1 fans will be converted in America.
Okay, so my question is going to be nice, short, and sweet because it's very simple to answer. And I will not say who this is from, but Even though you could probably guess because we have 5 regular listeners probably. But it is Hamilton married, and how long has he been racing in Formula One? So no, Hamilton is not married. I think he's one of the 2 drivers that are currently single. Most of them are in relationships, which also, side note, I find fascinating because they're never in one place all the time. So I don't know if it's just like a stability thing or if what, but he's been in F1 since 2007, so about 15 years now. He started with McLaren, and then in 2013 he moved to Mercedes, where he is now and where he'll probably retire from. So one of the few drivers that didn't move around too much. At least right now, I feel like it's becoming more common to hop around. But he's been a very dedicated driver to the teams he's been with. I know you talked a lot about it in our Mercedes episode, so good one to listen to too if you want to learn more about Lewis Hamilton.
Next question for me is, would you review a NASCAR race? Short answer, yes. Long answer, not long answer, medium answer. I intend to go to and do a race recap of the street race that NASCAR will have in Chicago. So I think that could be really fun, and I'm looking forward to that.
The next question for me was, what happens if a driver is sick? So all teams have reserve drivers that are to fill in the chance of one of their 2 main drivers being sick or unable to participate for whatever reason. This has become much more common now that COVID over the last couple of years. So, of course, like in the beginning of this year, Vettel was out for the first 2 races with COVID, and that left Nico Hulkenberg to come in on speed dial to drive for them for the first 2 races. You can also be, I know this right away, but you can also be a current F1 driver and be a test driver for one of those larger teams. So great example, you'll see it too in Drive to Survive. George Russell filled in for Lewis Hamilton for Mercedes when Lewis Hamilton was out with COVID. And George Russell at the time was a driver for Williams, but was able to step into that Mercedes seat and drive for him. Great performance, bad outcome, just, team, everything, etc. But currently, we also have Mick Schumacher, who is one of the 2 reserve drivers for Ferrari. Ferrari has 2. They have Mick, of course, and then they have Antonio Giovinazzi, who is a former Alfa Romeo driver for F1, and this year he is currently in Formula E.
Is there a driver this season you want out, and who would replace him? I think the easy answer here is Lance Stroll. I would want.
Oh, really? I thought the easy answer was Latifi.
I don't dislike Latifi. I don't really like Lance Stroll.
I mean, yeah, if we could get the whole Strolls out of F1, I would be satisfied. But I think to replace him, I would say De Vries or Piastri.
Who is the oldest driver and what is considered old in F1? The oldest driver currently is Fernando Alonso at a ripe 41 years old, just got a multi-year deal. The next oldest driver is Lewis Hamilton. I believe he's 37 right now. Mm-hmm. What is considered old in F1? I think it depends driver to driver, but I would say a good benchmark is to see where a driver's career is at when he's 30. If he is seemingly out of his prime, I would say 30 is pretty old. If he seems to continue being on the up and up, like a Lewis Hamilton, like what I imagine Max Verstappen will be like, I would say 30 is still pretty young. Just kind of depends on driver performance.
I would say now, like in recent years, 35 seems to be more of the cap because the performance age, people are, can do things, better for longer. And also the car too. I think it's easier to handle, maybe better now than it was. So like Sebastian Vettel, I think he's 34, 35. So it makes sense like for him to, he's obviously not in a great car. He has a couple young kids, so it makes sense for him to retire around this age. But then you have Daniel Ricciardo, who's I think 32, and he is still performing. Yeah. But again, so you would want to see him more because he may be not be in his prime, but Lewis Hamilton's 37 and doing incredible. So
I know the general driver age average is now lower than it was in the past because teams are giving younger drivers chances. I would be interested to see over the last 10 years the average age of podium drivers at the Grand Prix. If you take out maybe Max and Lewis as the 2 outliers, because one is really old, one is really young, I would be interested to see the average age of a podium finisher.
I might do that during this summer break and make some graphics out of it because I'm actually fascinated with data. Obviously, I do it. It's like half. You're also an analyst. It's really interesting. So I might actually during this maybe this week or something, since I have nothing going on, surprisingly, might take all of these numbers and ages and people and try and find some average and then make some graphics. So if you want to find out, follow us on social media real quick if you're listening before we get to the end. We're Break Check F1.
Perfect.
We're on TikTok. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter, YouTube. So go check us out. But yeah, we'll put that there.
That was great. We did not discuss that before.
No. So
Here.
why can't Andretti join in / will they? So I talked a lot about this actually on the Undercut podcast, which if you haven't listened to them, go check it out. But I had a whole bit where I talked about Andretti in F1 as the one American that was on that podcast episode. I just kind of took the reins on that one. But so Michael Andretti is looking to enter F1 in the 2024 season. For those who aren't aware, his father is one of the 2 drivers who have won races in F1, NASCAR, and IndyCar, which is pretty impressive. His dad is also one of 2 American drivers who have ever won a world championship in Formula One. And Michael's also a successful open wheel driver as well. He has an IndyCar team as well, who has won multiple championships. And he already says he has an engine supplier lined up with Renault if he were to enter the sport, which would also, I think, be a pretty good pairing. But yeah, the Andretti family, just for context, too, is rich in motorsport. And I find it very unlikely if they're unable to get in, who would get in. But so at the Miami Grand Prix, he went to the different teams in hopes to get signatures from the current F1 leaders in support of adding Andretti to the global grid, because while it is up to the FIA, they obviously want the teams to be in alignment with this before adding anyone else. But of the 10 teams, only Zach Brown from McLaren and the Alpine CEO, Laurent Rossi, signed his form. So 2 teams out of 10 signed, which is pretty low numbers. Some of the concerns like Horner and Toto Wolff both agree on was that, which is, one thing that they can both agree on is they don't want Andretti in it. But they say that there isn't enough evidence that the team will bring in enough revenue to make up for what the other teams are losing by adding another pile. So again, for those who didn't see all these changes that have been happening, there's cost gaps on these teams. Now the money that they get at the end of the year, it's divided up by 10 teams. If you add in another team, the money at the end of the year that doesn't change will then be divided by 11 teams, which means each team is getting a lesser amount. To me, the obvious solution is we'll just increase it. Just increase it for the 11th team. So so the number each team doesn't change. We just have more teams. I think that makes the most sense. Just offhandedly, I think maybe they'll end up doing that. I would hope that they end up doing that because they're already making an adjustment this year because of all the increasing energy prices and gas prices and et cetera. It's just very unrealistic with all the inflation that they've already had to increase it. So who's to say,
Money's not real.
Yeah, exactly. You can really put it wherever you want, guys. But there is the Concord Agreement that all teams signed in 2020, where there's a $200 million one-time buy-in fee that would be dispersed amongst the other teams to compensate for that lesser pay at the end of the season. Which $200 million to buy in, and Andretti's like ready to go. Is like, okay, he's serious, because that's a lot of money to just throw at it. And not to mention the money spent for building, just building sites and etc. He did say he wants to keep it very American. Obviously, Colton Herta, who's on his IndyCar team, would be driving for Andretti. He's also an incredible IndyCar driver. He's the youngest IndyCar winner, like race winner currently. So kind of like the Max Verstappen, I think, of IndyCar. I think he's quite talented.
Yeah.
And so it would, again, Formula One really wants to get American followers, American viewership, and what better way than to have a real based American team that will be building their cars in America, which also Americans love. They love buying American, building American, etc. So that's another win-win for Americans. And you would have an American driver and great leadership from someone who has historical motorsport experience. So to me, I think it all kind of makes sense. And I think that alone is kind of the sell-in for being an American team. So I don't see where they're not bringing additional benefits to Formula One, because they're pretty much providing them everything Formula One wants. And they're doing it, I think, in a more efficient way, or at least a quicker way than, say, Drive to Survive, where Drive to Survive does one thing where it gets people interested, but Andretti brings fan base and brings followers and people who are maybe more focused on IndyCar, NASCAR, etc., just starting to watch and actually really pay attention, follow, participate in Formula One. So there's all of that. But yeah, so FIA, they're still trying to consider it. It's a very difficult, long process. 2024 is the soonest that they would be able to get in. It's far too late to try even for 2023. And I think at this point, it might even be, if it's not 2024, I think it'll be 2026 after the new regulations, just because it would be very expensive to build a car for 1 year and then have to change it again. So we'll see. But I know there has been some historical experience with other teams entering and having to leave shortly after for financial reasons and lack of sponsorship. But again, I don't think that would be a worry with Andretti, because again, they're an American team. Americans love to support American, and they could easily get a company like Coca-Cola or etc., something like
Ford.
that. Ford. Yeah, like more American teams that are supporting a genuine American team, or American company supporting an American team. And I think that would be much more likely. So if it's not Andretti, don't worry, because we might have Audi coming in 2026. So I do think within the next, 4 years, we will at least have an 11th team. But I would love in 2026 to have 2 more teams by that point, which would obviously then be Andretti and Audi. I would love to see them both in, but fingers crossed.
Very impressive to have 210 million liquid, like ready to hand over. Can we blame our alcoholism on Ferrari? I don't dislike Ferrari, but I'm not really a Ferrari super fan. And I don't really drink. Megan, do you want to take this question?
Yeah, I only had one thing written down, and that was yes. Do I think it's healthy? No. Am I concerned for this person's health? 100%. I hope you're okay. Take the summer break to breathe, maybe go on a walk.
Drink some water.
Out. Yeah, drink some water. Pedialyte, something. But yeah, can you blame it for this season? For right now, use it as an excuse? I wouldn't say no.
We are on our last 2 here. Megan, why don't we have an American driver in F1?
Okay. Let me take a sip of water. Why don't we have an American driver? I think we've touched a little bit on this too, but just for some also context, we have had some notable drivers in the past that were American drivers, most notably, of course, Mario Andretti and then Phil Hill. They're also the former championship winners. But the last American driver to drive in F1 was actually in 2015, so not too long ago, and that was Alexander Rossi. He drove a few races for Haas, but it was the last full-time American driver, so one that had a permanent F1 seat, was Scott Speed, and he was a driver for Toro Rosso, which is now AlphaTauri, and that was from 2006 and the 2007 season. Not a huge name. I don't think did a ton with Toro Rosso.
Has a cool name.
It's a cool name. I mean, really convenient.
Yeah.
He saw it and went with it, really. So,
yeah.
But given F1, again, is a largely European sport, both with the racing series and talent scouts, and most of the fan base being there. For example, too, Daniel Ricciardo, amongst other drivers, he left Australia at a young age as a teenager and lived in, I think, Italy or something, just so he had the opportunity to compete in some of these bigger races and get noticed and hopefully find some sponsorship in Europe so that he could become an F1 driver, because that's where they're mostly looking. So if you're not racing in Europe, your odds of being found and scouted for and et cetera or sponsored was very rare.
Checo lived in a restaurant.
Yeah. And then not even just like some of the, single seater racing, but or some of the bigger racings as a teenager, but karting is also not as fine tuned in America as it is in Europe. It is so much more competitive and prioritized there. So where most drivers start anywhere from like 3, 4 to 7 in karts and racing in Europe, it's not as common for them to start competing in the US until maybe like 12, 13, etc. So at least in some of those more high-end racing competitions where they could actually get noticed in the FIA sort of competitions, it's just not as common here. And then again with NASCAR, it's also very popular here. Like you said, Americans love to support American. So it's because of the broadcasting. And I mean, we get Sky Sports broadcasted through ESPN, but I don't know if that was always the case. And so it also, the accessibility of being able to watch F1 just isn't as common or as easy. And you already have sports here like IndyCar, NASCAR, where it kind of seemed like enough because they didn't really know much about F1. It's not really talked about here, prioritized. I do want to say there is Logan Sargent, who's a 21-year-old Formula 2 driver for Carlin Racing, and he is a reserve driver for Williams. He's caught the eye this year of many fans, and he's suspected to be in F1 at some point, given both the growing fan base in America and he is a young talent. Personally, I both don't want and don't think he'll be in it next year because I worry he is still he's young. He's 21 years old. I don't want it to be another Yuki situation where you have this 21-year-old with anger issues and immaturity going into a seat, getting into arguments, not knowing, how to race with the car or how to perform, and having that lack of experience. Because again, like American driver, still not as much experience as say someone like Lando Norris, who had been racing since he was 4. So still, again, like I don't want to see him in it too soon and it kind of blow up in his face. But at the same time, I do think, maybe 2024, 2025, I would love to see him in a Williams seat. And I do think it's kind of inevitable. So if it isn't Colton Herta, I would love to see it be Logan Sargent.
Yeah, I think we've both been very vocal. We want the next American driver to just be ready to go.
Yeah. All right. So our last question of the day was why Formula One? I don't know if you want to kick that one off.
I've actually gotten this question a couple times from different friends, just why I'm into it, because it's not something that I was into in the past, but am now. So my family has just always been a car family. My dad's always had muscle cars. I used to be really into NASCAR and monster trucks and drag racing, NHRA drag racing as a kid. It's just something that's been really, really, really involved in my life. My whole life is just motorsport. As I grew up, I lost it a bit, and that's to no fault of any of these sports or any of these organizations. I think I was just really into it because my dad was, and I think as I became my own person, found my own interests, I just had other things that I liked more. Formula One is like my thing, like that is something that I found and I liked, and it's something that I can talk about and watch with my dad, and that has been super fun. But at the end of the day, it is my own interest that I came up with and found on my own. And Formula One has gotten me, I'm karting all the time now. I'm back into just generally motorsports in general, cars in general. Like I have different ideas of things I could do. I eventually want to have like a track car, maybe like just something that I have just to race. And obviously these are very far down the road, but it's kind of reignited just kind of like my love for cars and motorsport in general. And I plan on it being a part of my life for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, it was different because I don't come from a family that really watched any motorsport or just knew anything about it. The most was, I know, like my dad, when he was growing up in the backyard or someone's backyard, he would ride the little motorbikes on like these mud hills and stuff. And my grandpa had built like a track or something somewhere on their land. So, like just little things like that. But otherwise, I had really no exposure to it. We had the Derby in our county fair. So like I've seen that before.
Yeah.
My old cars was in the Derby because I totaled it. It's fine, but I was fine. But my someone I went to school with used my old car in the Derby and got second place, and so like that was cool to see and everything. But other than that, like I really had no exposure to cars or racing or motorsport. But when I was living in New York, which also was kind of a weird place too to get into motorsport because that's a very big metropolitan city.
Yeah.
But I had some friends that I worked with and just in general who watched it. And so I started to kind of pay more attention to it during COVID. Just kind of had a lot of things going on, wasn't really passionate about a lot, just didn't really know, et cetera. But finding Formula One, it was something that I was so fascinated by, just the amount of people and things and events that go into making it what it is, whether that's the engineering of the car, the engineers themselves making calls during the race, the driver's mental and physical health, weather, all the different tracks and just the locations of them, and just how much of an international sport it is. I find it all so fascinating, and I like understanding how things work and why. And so it kind of takes a lot of my personal interest and puts them all together. And just along with, I started writing about it and learning more about Formula One through Drive Tribe, which was, it's no longer a site, but I was able to get back into my passion of writing again, and just learning about Formula One. And it's really, again, like you said too, it's something that, you found yourself, that you got into yourself, it wasn't heavily influenced from something like growing up or whatever. And it's something that I can introduce the people to. So, anyone who knows me, like, especially growing up, you'd be like, Megan, Formula One, Megan Motorsport. Like, you would never put the two and two together, because I've always been a very big tennis and football. Those are really the only two sports I've ever aggressively paid attention to and followed. Also, side note, there is a tennis documentary similar to Drive to Survive coming out about tennis. Very excited about that, because I've grown up loving tennis. That's why I always watch with my grandpa. So, like how you grew up with like NASCAR and stuff, that was me with tennis. So very excited for that. But anyways, yeah, like Formula One, it was just something that, I've kind of got, like sparked a lot of interest. It's a really great community, and it's a cool way to meet other people, especially now that I'm moving to London and it's much bigger in Europe. I'm very excited for that too. And it's a great conversation starter too for meeting new people.
Yeah. One last quick thing. When we first started this, you do not know the amount of people that were very confused when I was starting a podcast about Formula One racing with Megan. You could give people 100 guesses onto what I was about to say, and I don't think they ever would have landed on that.
No.
And like Megan and I were friends in college, but not start a podcast together, friends.
Especially about Formula One.
About Formula One, yeah, we just have this one unique, very niche interest, but I think we're both better off having Formula One in our lives. Thanks
everyone who's listened this far. Bit of an episode, but a lot of great questions. So thank you to everyone too who sent those in. It's always fun to just talk about things that aren't depressing Ferrari news or drivers that we love that might not be in the sport anymore. So yeah, great episode. Great way to kick off the summer break. Make sure again to follow our social medias. We'll be back again soon with another episode. I think it's our recap that's next, right? Or is it another?
Yeah, I think it was our recap next.
Yeah, our recap's next. Okay, so we'll be looking back at our predictions. Yes, they're embarrassing. Yes, we will still cover them. But yeah, so we have that next.